Greetings, fellow travelers. Oblyx here, coming at you today from my test world, where today we're going to look at Ore Duplication.
Shut up and sit down.
So lots of mods can do it. I've got Actually Editions sitting right here. So we got an Actually Editions furnace in their laser transfer network. We can take a piece of gold, drop it into their crusher. This is a double crusher, but since there's only one ore, it's only going to crush one. So it'll smash it down into dust and then move it over here into the smelter, and you get 2 ingots out of it. So that's ore duplication. We took 1 ore and turned it into 2. You know, extra utilities can do it too. So we've got another furnace with a battery running these wireless transmitters, making the crusher, grind it up, bring it over to the furnace, and turn it into 2 ingots. You know, same thing Actually Editions does, slightly different way of doing it. Heck, even old faithful Tinker Smelter can do it. You know, we can take a gold ore, drop it in there. You gotta wait a minute, but it'll melt it down. Then we can turn it into ingots using these casting tables and these ingot casts. So it should be almost done. Yep, almost there. And finished. So now we can just pipe that out. And we've got our 2 ingots ready to go. Interesting thing, you drop them back in there and it'll cook them again. How cool is that? Then you have things like thermal expansion. Now thermal expansion can ore duplicate, turning 1 ore into 2 ingots, but if you add some extra device, this magma crucible with pyrotheum dust, which it turns into tectonic petrotheum, and then you add an augment into your pulverizer, the tectonic initiator, you can actually triple your ore. So it will crush this gold ore and use some of this tectonic petrotheum and turn it into 3 dust, which will kick it over here and cook 3 dust and give you 3 ingots. So that's pretty nice, ore tripling. And there you go. But this is pretty late game stuff. I mean, this, you know, getting enough of this stuff and making the tectonic petrotheum is pretty late game stuff, and it gets you 3. All right, for immersive engineering, you've got the massive crusher. Now I am using the Mekanism creative power cubes to power this guy. I didn't do his own power like I did with the other mods because it would be this big old massive machine and facility to make it work. So Mekanism tends to like its big stuff, and it also uses an arc furnace. I'm not going to rebuild that either because I've got one right here we'll use. So, but it has some interesting qualities. If we take this crusher and we drop a gold ore in, I love that animation, that is so cool, we get this dust. So if I pick that up, I take it over to our arc furnace and drop it in our arc furnace. We'll see it cook up. And I did have some gold in my inventory. I'm going to get rid of that and show you it is 2 ingots. But you really don't even need the crusher. If you just have the ore in the arc furnace, you can drop that in like so. I think more what it's for is using this external heater with the furnace. As you can see, that gave us, we'll get rid of our gold from before, 2 gold. We didn't have to use the crusher, so you can just build the arc furnace. You also get slag. So you can just build the arc furnace and call it good. You don't need the necessarily the crusher. Unless you don't have the arc furnace, then you can use the crusher and just a regular old furnace. Then we have our friend Mekanism. I'm often heard on various chat groups and things that I'm in saying phrases like "Mekanism is life," and I'm often asked, Oblyx, why in the heck do you say such things? That just sounds crazy. Well, you'll see here in just a minute. So Mekanism can process ores in 5 tiers. So the first tier is your basic one. We'll call it tier 0 because it's exactly the same as a Minecraft furnace. 1 ore in and 1 ingot out. And it can process just about every ore in the game. As you can see, we've got iron and aluminum and nickel and uranium, osmium, which is actually from Mekanism. Of course, it should process that. Platinum and lead, all those things. So we're going to take a piece of gold. We're going to drop it in. Now this is fully upgraded. And you can see our gold shows up here in the empty slot. Now for all of these tests I'm going to show you, we are using creative energy cubes. So we are powering the machines with creative power. I'm not going to go through the process of making power for each one of these machines. So that's just a heads up. So this guy, tier 0, just a smelter, 1 ore in, 1 ingot out. So next up is tier number 1. Now tier number 1 adds the enrichment chamber to the smelter. The cool thing about these is they all use the same machines, they just add another machine or 2 in front of them. Or 3 or 4, depending on what you're trying to do. So in this tier, we're going to do basically the same thing we did with these other tiers over here. We're going to put 1 ore in, and we're going to get 2 ingots out. Now we'll do our gold here in a second. We haven't done it yet, so there's our gold slot. But we've got all the other ores in here that we've put in 1 ore and gotten 2 ingots. So it'll basically process everything. So no extra special stuff, just 2 machines, an enrichment chamber, and a smelter. And these guys are all configured to just push out to the side and go into the other machine. So we're going to drop our ore in. We'll see it come out, go into the smelter, and boom, 2 ingots. So easy peasy. Now I have upgraded these machines. These are all upgraded with speed and energy. You don't need the energy. We've got creative power, but just in case. Next we go up to tier 2. Now in tier 2 we're going to put 1 ore in and get 3 ingots out. And we add 2 new machines. So we still got our smelter, we still got our enrichment chamber from the previous tier, but we're going to add a crusher and a purification chamber. And in this tier, we are going to need some chemical processing. Unlike we haven't needed it in any of the previous tiers, we just needed the base machines. In this tier, this purification chamber requires oxygen to do what it needs to do. So we've got to get and pipe oxygen in, which is what that pipe is right there. To get oxygen, you take water, which I always like to get water out of the kitchen sink if you have cooking for blockheads in the pack. Mekanism does have a pump you can use to draw water out, which I've actually got running over here. So again, creative energy power, running a Mekanism pump into this fluid tank. So it's just constantly pumping water. But if you want a whole lot of water fast, I really prefer these kitchen sinks. They never run out. Infinite water source. We're going to pipe that water in to an electrolytic separator. Now we're going to use this device in every other tier all the way around. And it basically takes water, turns it into hydrogen and oxygen. Now if I turn off this dumping excess and just set it to idle, you'll see the water starts to fill up. Because I leave them on the dumping excess, which tells it this dumping excess tells it to dump this excess. This dumping tells it to dump this one. Okay, so if I just say straight dump, it'll get rid of the oxygen. If I say idle, it will let it fill up and the machine will shut off. Well, if you're needing hydrogen but you're full of oxygen, it's not going to make any more. So you want to tell it to dump that excess, so it will constantly be making. But that will use constant power, so keep that in mind. You got to find a way to regulate it. But this guy will output oxygen on the right-hand side. So if we follow this pipe around, I love how they do the different colors of the gases. So the hydrogen will come out white and the oxygen comes out this pale yellow. It's very cool. So we're piping it directly into this purification chamber, which will feed what it does into the crusher, which will feed it into the enrichment chamber, which will feed it into the smelter, and we get triple the ores. Now notice, I've got some ore down here at the bottom. That is because these ores cannot be processed in this machine. They just simply will not work. The yellorite, the platinum, the nickel, the aluminum, uranium, Immersive Engineering's nickel, and Immersive Engineering's bauxite, which becomes aluminum, cannot be processed in this machine. You can process iron, osmium, copper, tin, silver, and lead. Now, if you wanted to do, say, yellorite, turn it into yellorium, it's not going to process it in this machine, so you can't even put it in. So it won't run down the whole chain, but you can just start right here. Remember, it did work in Tier 2, and Tier 2 starts at the enrichment chamber. So you could just drop it in there, cook your 2 up, and there you go. Now, in this particular mod pack, yellorite turns into uranium. That's a mod pack specific thing. So you can treat this as a Tier 1, a Tier 2, or Tier 0, a Tier 1, and a Tier 2. It can be all of them. But if we take our gold, drop it in that purification chamber, it becomes these clumps. Those get processed in the enrichment chamber, which get processed in the smelter, which show up down here as 3 ingots. 1 ore, 3 ingots. Now, when I'm playing a mod pack that has Mekanism in it, and I'm going to be using Mekanism Ore Duplication, this is usually the tier I start with. I usually skip these 2 because they're very, very simplistic. I usually just go with a basic Minecraft furnace until I get to this tier and go straight here, because really all you need is a sink and a couple of machines and you're good to go. Now there is a hidden trick in this guy. If you notice, we're not using this hydrogen. It's just sitting here and going to waste. You can use hydrogen. See, I've got the same thing set up over here, an electrolytic separator with hydrogen in it coming from that sink. But this is piping out to a gas burning generator. This guy will burn this hydrogen to make RF. And he produces a fair amount of RF. So he can produce 640 RF a tick, which is pretty darn good. So you could, in this setup, if you didn't have that energy cube, just had a cable, you could put a gas burning generator right there with a pressurized pipe to get that hydrogen out into that gas burning generator. See it filling up, producing power. So we're producing 800 RF per tick right here. And it's powering all these machines. So now he becomes self-sustaining. How cool is that? Plus he can power some other things around your base too. So this is why I go straight into this tier. It's an awesome tier. Now, moving on to Tier 3. In Tier 3, we put in 1 ore and get out 4 ingots. But as you can tell, it's a slightly more complicated tier, which is why I don't go here at first. I go down here to Tier 2. But this guy has the same limitations that the previous tier had with the materials it can't produce. And we're going to see that again in the next tier as well. But it will turn 1 ore into 4 ingots. So we have the same setup of machines, and we have our purification chamber, and it is getting oxygen just like the other one did. Now on this one I've got it piped from below. But then we add a chemical injection chamber. And that chemical injection chamber wants hydrogen chloride. Now to make hydrogen chloride, we can just follow this pipe back with this cool white gas in it. Now I've used these tanks several places throughout the build. You'll see them. They're not necessary. Okay, I just put them there so I could process lots of things at one time without running out of gases. All these do is store excess gas. Okay, but they're not necessary for the build. And there's of course our creative power cell. You do need some form of power to run this, after all. So remember, we're looking for this hydrogen chloride. We're going to follow it down the path into this guy, another new machine. This is the chemical infuser. So it is taking power from that creative cube. It is taking chlorine from the left and hydrogen from the right to make hydrogen chloride. I love how Mekanism does this. I think it's really cool. Very real world chemistry. It's pretty neat. So it's taking the hydrogen and the chlorine, and turning it into hydrogen chloride and piping it down the path. So where do we get, well, let's follow the hydrogen first. If you remember, we're getting that from the kitchen sink piping into this electrolytic separator. The same thing that we saw right here. Remember when we powered our gas burning generator? We powered it with that hydrogen. Well, in this setup, we're using the hydrogen to go into the chemical infuser. Now, if you're making enough, you could still run a gas burning generator on here if you're making enough hydrogen. If you're not, then you can't. It just depends on how you're processing. Now remember, this guy takes water in and he turns it into hydrogen and oxygen. Now remember, we were looking at two sides, right? We had our hydrogen and we had our chlorine. So where's that chlorine coming from? Well, it's this kind of pinky line. We're going to follow it back down to another electrolytic separator. I told you we use a lot of these in this. This guy is taking a substance called brine, which we'll talk about in a second, and it's turning it into sodium and chlorine. Now notice I have this one set a little different than I had the other ones. It's set to idle on the chlorine, but dumping excess on the sodium. That's because, as you see, there's nothing connected to the sodium side. We're not using the sodium. So I just don't want it getting full, but I'm okay with the chlorine getting full. So that's why that one is a little bit different. So remember, the chlorine is going down here and turning into our hydrogen chloride. We don't care about the sodium. But where is this brine coming from? How are we getting this brine? Well, if we follow this input path right here, this bright yellow, now this is a liquid, not a gas. Everything we've been looking at up to this point has been a gas. This is where we flip to liquids, right? And it's coming out of this, right? The solar evaporation plant, which is our first multi-block structure. Now, it is a bit rigorous on how it has to be built. It must be a 4 by 4, okay? And it can be up to, I believe, 18 blocks tall. You don't need these solar panels on the top. If you don't have them, you do need to fill in these corner blocks, okay? The reason they're here is to provide extra heating. This guy does not use power to turn water into brine. He does work from water. He's getting input water from here, and he's turning water into brine, and he uses heat to do that, which is why we're in a desert, because Mekanism is biome specific. for this to work at its maximum efficiency, it needs to be in a hot biome. Deserts, savannas, mesas, those kind of things. You go into ice spikes, tundra, taiga, mega taiga, it's not going to be very hot. You're going to have to externally heat this guy. And I'll show you how to do that when we get over here, because I have set some of those up just so you can see it. He does have an interface. You do need to replace one of the blocks with a controller, and you do need, behind these pipes, you will see these are valves. So you'll need two valves, one to input and one to extract. And there's nothing fancy about them. They're both the same valve. You don't have to wrench them or anything. Just connect the right pipe to them and it gets happy. Use your configurator right here to make it an extract pipe or an insert pipe, and it'll love you for life. So if we look at the interface, we can see that it's inserting water and converting that into brine. And it's running at, we can switch this temperature, 443 degrees Celsius. Or you can look at it in Fahrenheit if you prefer Fahrenheit, 822 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the benefit of the biome and those solar panels. Those solar panels are helping out as well. So if we make it day, this will slowly start to creep up. See it creeping up on us? Pretty cool that it monitors not only the biome, but the day-night cycle as well. That's how we get our brine. So that lets us quadruple our ores. So if we take a piece of gold and we drop it in, remember it's mixing it with the hydrogen chloride. We watch it just cycle through all the machines. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go, 4 gold. How cool is that? It is a little bit more expensive because you do got to make a ton of these evaporation blocks. Again, you don't necessarily need the solar panels, and you can make a shorter one. It's just not going to produce brine as fast. And what I've always found is that brine seems to be the holdup. Anything that needs brine, brine is the holdup. So I tend to build them big so that I can get enough out of it. So that's tier 3. All right, let's move on to tier 4. In tier 4, we're going to take 1 ore and produce 5 ingots. 5! That's just crazy talk. But you can tell it's quite a bit more involved in order to get there. Now, you don't need 2 of the solar evaporation plants. I'm just running 2 so that it can keep up with what I'm trying to make it do here, because I have fully upgraded everything. So it does tend to bog down. Like I told you before, brine, like when we were over here, brine becomes an issue. That's usually the first thing that becomes an issue. So what we have in this, we have this, the tail end is the same as all our other series, or all our other tiers. Smelter, enrichment chamber, crusher, purification chamber, chemical injection chamber. Remember, this guy gets our hydrogen chloride. It makes it the exact same way, just piping it from further away, but it's the exact same setup as tier 4. Or, I'm sorry, tier 3. But we add a chemical crystallizer, a chemical washer, and a chemical dissolution chamber. Now, this guy doesn't require anything but power. The chemical washer requires water. Makes sense. Washer needs water. Where's my favorite water source? Kitchen sink. Here's the one that is the most unique and new, and the most troublesome machine out of all the machines that we've seen so far, because it requires sulfuric acid. Now, in order to get sulfuric acid, remember, we don't necessarily need these tanks. I just like to have them so that we keep extra gas there, and it is a gas, we get it from a chemical infuser, which we've seen already in the previous tier, except for this time we're piping in water vapor and sulfur trioxide. That gets us our sulfuric acid. To get the water vapor, we come out, that is also a gas, so we're using the gas pipes, to a rotary condensator. Now this guy takes water in and turns it into water vapor. So if you follow that water pipe back, I bet you're going to find a kitchen sink on at the end of it, because you guys know I like that. Anytime I need water, it's going to come from the kitchen sink. So that's our water vapor going into our chemical infuser. Now how do we get this sulfur trioxide? So let's follow this nice salmon colored line. And we got to hop over here. That comes from another chemical infuser, right? We had one right there that I just broke because, yeah, reasons. Sometimes, I tell you, good thing I'm in creative, right? Let's get a piece of sand, pop it back. Good night. There we go, making sulfuric acid again. Gotta remember, can't punch stuff. So we've already seen a chemical infuser before. So here's another one. It is making that sulfur trioxide. Now it's spazzing out because it's providing sulfur trioxide over there. That's why it has that look to it. So its inputs are sulfur dioxide and oxygen. So we're taking sulfur with 2 oxygens, adding a 3rd oxygen, and getting sulfur with 3 oxygens. That is so cool. I love that Mekanism does that. So where are we getting the oxygen? Well, we've seen this before, right? We're going to follow it back to the source. And it's the same place we're getting the hydrogen, right? That we've been getting even in the previous 2 tiers. Water in an electrolytic separator gets you hydrogen and oxygen, right? So, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Yeah, let me up. Got hung up on the pipes. So, we're getting our oxygen, making sulfur trioxide. Where does the sulfur dioxide come from? Well, it comes from this chemical oxidizer. The chemical oxidizer is fed with sulfur dust, and that makes sulfur dioxide. So where does the sulfur dust come from? Well, it comes from a chemical injection chamber. We've seen these before, haven't we? There's one in our chain over there. If we feed it gunpowder, and this is the only machine in this whole series that does not have renewable resources, though you can obviously set up a creeper farm or something to that effect, but it's not renewable from within Mekanism. Okay, it's not a, pipe something out of somewhere and fill it back up. It's a solid that you're going to have to go farm somewhere else. So we're feeding it gunpowder, we're feeding it hydrogen chloride, and that is becoming sulfur dust. So where are we getting the hydrogen chloride? Well, behind that we've got yet another chemical infuser. 3rd time's the charm, right? Which we're feeding chlorine and hydrogen. Hydrogen, remember, we're getting from our electrolytic separator. Separator? What the heck am I trying to say over here? The electrolytic separator, which is just taking water, turning it into hydrogen and oxygen. We just talked about it a second ago. So there's our hydrogen. It's also getting chlorine. So chlorine and hydrogen make hydrogen chloride. The chlorine is coming from another separate electrolytic separator. Hey, I said it right. How about that? So this electrolytic separator is taking brine and turning it into sodium and our chlorine. And it's filling this tank back up, which is why there's none in there right now. So, and we've already talked about our brine, right? But this time I've got two systems on here. Now these guys are full height. Oh, no, they're not. They're a little bit short. But I have added external heating just so you can see what that would look like. Okay. So right now they should be, I'm using fuel wood heaters and they are not hot. They're not getting fuel. So we're looking at about 1.3K Fahrenheit without fuel. So if I come over here and go to this chest right here and I say lava. Now the fuel wood can only take lava buckets. It cannot take the fluid, and you can't hook a fluid pipe up to it. But if we just pop these in here, it'll start distributing them around and light these fuel woods up. You see their temperature starts to rise, and the temperature inside these solar evaporation plants is going to start climbing drastically. And it's going to produce brine at a faster rate, even at nighttime. Now if we make it day, and make it a not rainy day, there we go. You can see that temperature jumps up crazy high. You'll see it climb all the way up into the red, or it can. So it's producing brine at a significantly higher rate than it was before. So this affords us the ability to, remember, make 5 ingots out of 1 ore. And it has the same processing limitations as our previous 2 tiers did, where it can't do some of the ores from other mods. But all our basic ores it can do just fine. So this guy, because of the speed upgrades, he processes pretty darn quick. We throw our gold in, and he's just going to run down the chain real fast. It's already down to the crusher, it's into the smelter, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 ore. Now this is an item pipe. This is a gas. This is a gas. And this is a gas. That's a fluid, and that's a gas. Okay, so don't get them mixed up. Most things in this setup are gas pipes, with the exception of water and brine. Most everything else is a gas pipe or these power conduits. So that's our 5 times ore. Now, there is one extra benefit. You want to speed this along even further. These are all the basic machines. Basic purification chamber, basic chemical injection chamber, basic crusher, basic enrichment chamber, basic energized smelter. You guys that watch my furnace series, or the furnace challenge, you remember that there are more advanced tiers of machines where you can process 3 items at a time, or 5 items at a time, or 7 items at a time. Well, that's these guys back here. So here's an elite enriching factory. Processes 7 items at a time. Here's an elite smelting factory. Processes 7 items at a time. So if we take 64 gold, now remember this is only going to double because we've just got we're working on a tier 1 system here. Pop that gold in. It is fully upgraded, so it's going to be pretty quick. But you can see it just cranking out the gold, and it will come out with 2 stacks of 64 ingots. And it's almost done. And there we go. Super quick. But what if we were to upgrade all of the machines in this Tier 5 setup? Well, let's get rid of this gold in our inventory. And we can get rid of our mistake. That's what I've done here. I've replaced all the basic machines with the elite machines. See, remember, this purifying factory requires oxygen. Now, I am using infinite sources for the gases here, as opposed to actually creating myself like we did over there. Just to simplify, I didn't want to repeat that whole setup over here, since I've already shown it to you. You know, this is just more of testing for performance, right? So that's how to build it. This is how to play with it. So this does require the oxygen, but it puts the bar down here at the bottom instead of that little bar up here where the other one did. You know, this injecting factory does require the hydrogen chloride, but again, it puts it down here at the bottom. The rest just require power, but these are all up fully, you know, the elite and fully upgraded. Now, there are no upgrades for the chemical crystallizer, the chemical washer, or the chemical dissolution chamber. You stuck with those as is. But what happens if we put our 64 gold in? Well, dissolution chamber's cranking, pushing it into the washer, which is passing it right on through. We're hitting the chemical crystallizer, and it's working its little heart out as fast as it can go, but notice it's backing up with this clean gold slurry. So these machines, even though they've got all these upgrade slots, are never using them. Never ever using them. It's just not enough to keep it going. So it's fairly quick, and it is still taking our ore by 5 times, but you're not getting the benefit of these elite machines in this setup. Alright, so you've got to ask yourself, if we can put elite machines down here that have 7 slots each, is there a way that we can improve the performance of these first 3 machines to match that? Because this isn't going to cut it. Well, I've tried something over here. Yeah. So I've taken the first 3 machines and replicated that setup 11 times. Yeah. That's what I did. So this is kind of a stupid, you wouldn't probably build it in survival setup, though some people might. But yeah, you would have to produce just an absolute insane amount of hydrogen chloride, of oxygen, because these guys are just going to crank through it. The sulfuric acid, you're going to need a ton of that too. I'm using creative, so I've got that benefit. Now what's going to happen is this chest is going to dump all of its gold when I throw this lever. This servo is set to round robin, which means it's going to dump it into all these machines, one right after the other, and fill them all up. All these machines, when they get done processing it, are going to spit it down this line and into this guy. And then we're going to let our 7 item factories take over from there. And this guy's empty, so let's see what he does. You ready? 3, 2, 1, go. We can see all of our gold shooting down the line here. And it should be hitting the last one. Yep. And should be chemically washing it, which it is. Then it should be crystallizing it, which it is, and we can see them all flowing into the line and getting pushed up here. And just a steady stream of items shooting in here. That's awesome. And our injecting factory is working overtime. Look at that. It actually can't keep up. The numbers are ticking up instead of ticking down. So we're up in the 20s, 21s, 22s. That's awesome. And it's processing 7 at a time, dumping it over into the purification chamber, which is running 7 at a time. The crushing factory, 7 at a time. Enriching factory, 7 at a time. Smelting factory, 7 at a time. And just look at the gold shooting out. Now remember, we're taking each one of those ores, which there was tons of, and timesing them by 5. I mean, look at that. It's just rolling in. And it's got a long way to go. I mean, look at that. It's still totally full. Slurry's still full. These are done. So we're finished with the first row of machines. We're on to the second and third now. So we can just watch that stuff just shooting in. This guy is our bottleneck now, which is what we wanted to see if we could drive this guy as hard as he could go, and we've definitely achieved that. So we could probably shave off a couple rows of our triple machine setup here to find a nice balance. Imagine if we pull 2 to 3 rows off, we'd probably be good and get a nice balance. But as you can see, still pouring in, still tons of slurry. We're finally making a dent in the chemical wash. That's just crazy. I mean, imagine you go out on a hard day mining, do your diggy, you come home, you pop everything into this chest, throw the lever, walk away, go do some other stuff, come back, and you've got a crate just full of ore. 5 times what you just mined. Pretty darn awesome. So why do I say Mekanism is life? Well, show me another mod that can do that. You saw the best Actually Editions has to offer. You saw the best Extra Utilities had to offer. You've seen the best Tinkerers has to offer. Now this smeltery can get huge. That's a furnace, but it can get that size and bigger. But it's still only doubling. You saw the best thermal expansion has to offer, and best it can do is 3 times the ores. We did that 2 tiers ago without having to go find or craft the fairly expensive petroleum dust. All we needed was water that we got from the kitchen sink. Go figure. And remember, the best from Immersive Engineering is just, the crusher or the arc furnace over there. 1 ore in, 2 ore out. But then if we really want to crank it up a notch, we 5 times our ores. Yeah, we need a fairly good setup for it. I mean, here it is. You don't necessarily need the fuel wood heaters if you're in a hot enough biome, which this one is. But it is a fairly significant setup, but 5 times your ore may be worth it. That's up to you. Anyway, folks, you know what? Let's take one last look. I gotta just, oh, that's a beautiful sight. It's a beautiful, brings a tear to my eye. Just a gorgeous sight. Anyway, that's all the time I got for today. As always, I so do appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with me. And we're still in Halloween, and I can't even tell what that logo is on my chest that's showing up, but there it is. So, happy Halloween, folks. Coming up. As always, I appreciate you. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. Hopefully this has been a help for you. If it has, do me a favor and throw a thumbs up on there. I sure would appreciate it. Anyway, till next time, folks. Get out there and make some noise. See ya!